Hey everyone, welcome to week 3 of our Intro to Philosophy course and lesson 5, where we're going to be continuing to talk about ethical theories, building off of the utilitarianism framework as well as the virtue ethics framework that we've already taken a look at. Sorry if I sound a little froggy, I'm still getting over a sickness, but hopefully it's not too bad. I've been putting off making this video for a couple reasons. One is because of the cold that I've had, and also because we'll be talking about some theories that are a little bit more difficult to get your head around, I think, and we'll be talking about a couple of them. So I've been preparing to talk about this, so let's just get into it, okay? So to begin with, I'm going to talk about the oldest and the most widespread ethical theory that people use and have used for a long time, okay? And that is called divine command theory. Divine command theory is the idea that you should do what God says, right? This meme is obviously making somewhat of jest of that, but really, if we already subscribe to a religious tradition, that religion is going to have an ethical component to it, built in, right? It's not simply a metaphysical framework religion, right, telling us what exists and how we know it exists, right? So there's a epistemological as well as metaphysical component of religion, but there's also an ethical component, right? How ought we to live, which is built right in. So divine command theory stems from the idea that these religions have provided a deontological, that is a rule set, right, or a rule-based system for us to follow, and so we can know what is moral, what the right thing to do is, by consulting what God has told us to do, okay? So God in the Judeo-Christian and Abrahamic religions in general, right, which includes Christianity, Judaism, as well as Islam, these, three religions all have a similar concept of God, right? They all think that, the God of the Bible is also the God of the Quran, which is also the God of the Torah, right? Even though there are differing interpretations on what that rule is, right? And that's some foreshadowing for a difficulty this theory might have. But God in these traditions is conceived of a very powerful being, right? This is an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent being, right? That means it is an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good being, right? So this being, by definition, would know exactly the correct moral answer for every conceivable moral problem, right? This is, on one hand, extremely promising, right? As you have seen with virtue ethics as well as utilitarianism, these theories are somewhat difficult to apply, right? It's not just something that you can, consult or read. It's not authoritative or maybe, spelled out for us like it might be if we can consult what the divine commands for morality are. Okay, so. Again, this is promising, and ethics, according to divine command theory, is about applying the divine word to how we act as human beings, and there isn't really a step 2, okay? Now, this theory would put ethicists like myself out of business, right, if it wasn't for 2 big problems that the divine command theorist has to overcome, all right? So we're going to talk about those. So, the first big problem that the divine command theorist has to address and overcome is the Euthyphro dilemma. All right, this is a problem that comes out of Plato, right? So really old problem that still divine command theorists are wrestling with today, and it comes from the Euthyphro dialogue. So this is the way in which Plato wrote down his philosophy, was often between a conversation, and so he recorded the ideas in that conversation. So in the Euthyphro dilemma, the divine command theorist has 2 options, okay? So the first horn of the dilemma is that something is good because God has identified it as good, all right? This might not seem like a problem, right? If God is all-knowing, then of course he knows everything that is good. That makes sense here. But the problem with this horn is that if God is merely identifying what is good, then God becomes an unnecessary middleman here. it seems like we could simply find out what is good, what makes something good, if not God, right? God might be a reliable path to knowledge there, right? It might be easier to consult the divine word than to figure out for ourselves what is moral, but it's not necessary, right? Something else besides God makes things good, so why do we need it? The second horn that is available to the divine command theorists is that things are good or moral because God says they are, right? This again also kind of makes sense given how we've defined God. If God is the creator of the universe, then presumably he could have created morality as well. He makes it so. But this is also a kind of issue, right? So think about this, right? If God makes something moral just by saying that it is, then if God tomorrow said that you should go and torture children just for fun, right? Would you still think that's the right thing to do, right? Probably not, right? We might think, what has gone wrong here? Am I being deceived? If this is supposed to be the moral thing to do, right? But say you stick to your guns here. Say that God's commands are, by definition, the right thing to do. So, and I respect sticking to your guns, but let's see how we can deal with that. It turns out we still encounter another undesirable conclusion. And the undesirable conclusion is that it doesn't seem like you're acting morally at all here, right? It's the process of deferring to an authority, deferring to God, and we may have good reason to defer to God, maybe out of fear, an all-powerful being, maybe out of loyalty, faith, or obedience, right? These are all fine reasons to do something, right? But this is a different kind of a reason than a moral reason, right? Moral reasoning is the process of having our intuitions and testing them against theory. It's a process of reasoning through things, about making an argument. Whereas merely following a command is not that same kind of activity, right? So it seems like we certainly have reason to follow a divine command, but it might not be a moral reason. So that's a different kind of problem entirely, okay? The second kind of problem that the divine command theorist is going to have to face is an epistemological problem, right? So we know that epistemology is the subdiscipline of philosophy that deals with how do we know stuff. So say we've gone with the first horn of the Euthyphro dilemma. If that God, if not the source of morality, is nevertheless our most reliable guide to it. That would be great if we could get clear on what God's commands actually are, right? I already mentioned that all three of the major Abrahamic religions all claim to respond to the same God, but clearly they have very different interpretations much of the time as to how we actually should be acting morally. So in order to go with divine command theory, we have to be pretty darn sure of the existence of God, right? Which could be in question. We'd have to be pretty darn sure that the texts recording what God said, or the people who are recounting God's commands to us, are reliable, which could also be in question, right? Or at least we have an epistemological issue there. We also have to be sure about which gods we're even talking about, right? The Abrahamic God is not the only God that exists. You have a Greek pantheon. You have gods all over the world, thousands of them. And so which one is providing the commands, and how do we know that is the correct command to be taken, right? So all of these problems also apply to the second horn of the dilemma. Even if the commands are the commands coming from God, if something is moral merely because God says it is, right? The worry is that these commands are arbitrary, but also which God's arbitrary commands are we following, right? So while divine command theory is absolutely a legitimate moral theory, the oldest and most widely followed moral theory that there are enormous impediments to actually employing it in moral conversations, okay? But it is worth knowing because you might have come from a background of divine command theory, or, again, you very likely will encounter people who are deploying divine command theory, if they know it or not. So it's important to know kind of the strengths and weaknesses of this theory. So a perhaps more sophisticated religious moral theory is natural law theory. Okay, there's several different variations of this theory, but its most famous progenitor was Saint Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so this theory relies on the idea that again, if we're created by an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God, then that God would imbue us with the desire to seek what is good for ourselves, right? This is also a deontological theory, right? We can go from what our natural desires are to and apply a reason to that in order to develop our moral code. Okay, so the example that I have here is, I have a desire to stay alive. Others must have that same desire. And since it would be wrong to violate those desires that God has given us, it must be the case that murder is wrong, right? That violates some kind of divinely given desire. And so through this process of reasoning through what we have naturally been inclined to think, right, using our ethical intuitions, we can determine what is right or wrong, okay? So this is a big step up, I think, from divine command theory, because this is, right, the kind of activity that morality is about. It's about reasoning through what we ought to do, and what to do in specific instances as well. But this still suffers from many of the same epistemological problems that divine command theory has, right? It still relies on the idea that there is a God that is providing these desires that can be a reliable guide to morality, right? Without that, then it seems like this theory actually is fallacious reasoning. It seems to employ the naturalistic fallacy, which is the idea that what is natural is what is good, right? I have is ought here. This is an objection that was formulated by the Scottish philosopher David Hume. The cool fancy name for it is Hume's guillotine, right? But it's the idea that we can't, just by knowing the way things are, know the way things should be, right? The way something is to the way it ought to be, okay? And we can see this, right? If there's all kinds of things that are said to be natural that don't seem to be particularly good for us, right? And there could be some things that we think of as unnatural that don't seem to be particularly bad for us, right? Particularly, we see some pretty brutal, or what we interpret as brutal realities of nature, right? Sexual assault. There could be some vicious maiming in predation. Things that we think are pretty awful, but there's nothing more natural than these things. So without knowing that there is this God behind these natural kind of desires, then it seems like we have a really hard time justifying the derivations of this theory. Okay, so I'm not going to be testing you on natural law theory, but because we've only covered it so briefly here, but it is worth knowing because and worth knowing that there are some sophisticated ethical and religious theories out there besides divine command theory, right? Which is kind of the introductory level of morality for religious teaching, and it's been further extrapolated upon by religious and ethical scholars. Okay, so now we're going to switch to something that actually is similar to natural law theory, but does not have the same epistemological problems that a theory does that relies on a God for its grounding. Okay, this is Kantian ethics. Okay, so this is similarly a deontological system of ethics, right? Meaning it's about rules and the rules that we set for ourselves. But instead of desire, like in natural law theory, as the guide to what is good for us to do, this guy, Immanuel Kant, perhaps one of the greatest philosophers of all time, thought that we all have a capacity to figure out what is moral, and that's through the application of reason itself, right? So merely by using our intellect, by thinking things through, we can find out what the right thing to do is, okay? So Kantian ethics is challenging, right? And I'll fully admit that, even when I was in graduate school, fully thinking through this theory, really gave me some trouble. This is a tough theory. So what I want you to get out of what we're going to cover here is kind of the big ideas. Actually applying this theory is tough, right? So don't feel bad if you're not quite getting it. but see what you can do to start piecing it together. Okay, so there's a couple concepts we need to understand in order to understand Kantian ethics. The first is going to be the difference between hypothetical and categorical imperatives, okay? So, a hypothetical imperative, according to Kant, takes this form, right? If you want to do X, then you should do Y, okay? Take, for instance, if you want to succeed in this class, then you should study, right? But if you don't care about succeeding in this class, then you don't need to study, right? If you want to be an Olympian, then you ought to train, right? You ought to train at your sport. If you don't care about being an Olympian, then maybe you don't have a reason to do that, okay? Kant thought that morality was this second kind of thing, right? A categorical imperative. Doesn't matter if you want to do it, you should still do it, right? It applies categorically or universally. And so this is a much stronger kind of law here, a much stronger kind of rule for ourselves because it's just something you should do, okay? So we'll return to the categorical imperative in a second. The next thing that we need to understand is moral worth, okay? Kant thought there's only one thing that is actually of moral worth, right? The only thing that is actually good to do. So you can take a look at this intersection here, right? So we have doing the right thing or the right thing for the right reason. That is what Kant would call unconditionally good, right? This is the only thing of moral worth in Kant's eyes, right? There's if we don't have both of those concepts there, then it's not a morally worthy action. And let's see why that is, okay? So say we do the wrong thing, but we had the right reason. We had a good intention for doing it. Well, Kant would say that's not a moral action, right? That's not good enough to have good intentions. We must have also done the right thing. Right? You may have heard that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we need to be properly applying our good intentions in order to do something that is right, okay? Similarly, in this intersection down here, we have maybe we did the right thing, but for the wrong reason, okay? Maybe we saw a kid fall into a well, and we go and help them, but only because we thought that their parents would give us a reward, okay? We've still done the right thing by saving the kid, but it wasn't for the right reason, okay? So, to Kant, again, not a moral action. And then we have this intersection here, right? We did the wrong thing for the wrong reason, and I think that's pretty easy to say that's unconditionally bad, right? That's clearly the wrong thing to do, okay? But notice how special of a type of action this is, right? This is the kind of action that comes from obligation, from our duty towards ourselves and others. To do something of this kind is we do it. We do it even when we don't want to. We do it even when no one else is watching, and we even do it when it comes to some cost at ourselves, right? We do it because it's the right thing to do, and maybe for no other reason. To Kant, that is the only thing that is of unquestionable moral worth, okay? So, how can we tell when we've done something good, right? When have we actually met this bar, this really high bar of doing something for the right reason, right? Or doing something good for the right reason? Well, that is going to depend on our maxim, okay? This is the last concept that we'll need to know before we can kind of put this all together into a moral theory, okay? A maxim is a guiding principle or rule behind your action, okay? Before I go into this example, I don't want to confuse you. I'm not trying to talk about morality yet. I'm just trying to explicate what a maxim is, okay? I'll get to, so don't think of these as moral maxims yet, right? Just as rules that you might be following, okay? Okay, so say for instance, you decide to go to sleep, you're gonna stop working on your homework, maybe some assignment for some dumb intro to philosophy class, after a long day of hard work, right? And I'm not knocking this, right? I've certainly done this, all right? But your reason for acting, the guiding rule behind why you might be doing that could be a bunch of different things, right? So I have 3 examples of maxims here, all right? The first one is, the rule you could be applying to put down your work before you go to bed is, I will stop working when I feel like it. Okay, maybe I only work when I want to, and I stop when I don't. Okay, not a super binding rule, we might note, right? Our next maxim could be I'll balance my work and my bodily needs so that I live a happy and healthy life. Okay, well, that seems to be a more principled kind of rule, right? Our third maxim here, it's okay to not do my homework when I don't see how it benefits me, all right? Of all of these maxims, right, we can tell that the reason why we did this action can make all the difference, right? Some of these rules seem more principled than others. Some of them seem to be justifiable, maybe, and some seem to be not super principled, okay? So the maxim behind your action is about your intentions, right? And notice, to the outside observer, they're not necessarily going to know why you did your action, right? That's a tricky part, I think, about Kant's ethics, is that unlike utilitarianism, where anyone, including yourself, can apply the theory and know, right, was that the right thing to do? Well, just look at the consequences, and the consequences are visible to everyone. Kant's ethics goes far deeper than that, right? It's about right, this is something that you can apply to yourself, right? You can look inward and say, did I do the right thing? That depends on your maxim. Okay, hopefully you understand what a maxim is. I haven't told you yet what makes a maxim moral. That's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so Kant thought that morality is the categorical imperative, right? It is the thing that applies universally, whether you want it to or not. And the way that he explains the categorical imperative is to put it in terms of these formulations, okay? There's a bunch of them, I think like 7 or something. We're only going to look at 2, okay? So this first one is called the formulation of universal law, all right? Here's how Kant puts it. You should act, you should act only according to that maxim, which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction. Okay, Kant is a very wordy guy, right? Amazing philosopher, not a great writer all the time, okay? And maybe that's because he's German. Here's maybe how to put that in English, right? A rule is only moral when you could endorse that everyone follow the same rule, okay? Otherwise it says, don't be a hypocrite. So whenever you look at a maxim, you need to ask, could I will it that everyone else follow this same rule? All right, and this gets to morality. So let's take an example of murder, right? It's pretty obviously morally wrong, but why? Kant would say that the maxim underlying murder might just be, I can murder someone whenever it's convenient to me, okay? Could I make that universal? Could I, willingly make that something that everyone can apply in their own lives? Well, no, right? Everyone would go around killing each other whenever it's convenient, and that would be chaos, right? So I cannot in good conscience endorse that rule. Another one that we could look at is lying. Now this one is interesting, right? When you lie to someone, say your maxim is, I will lie whenever it benefits me, okay? Well, could someone, could you will that to be a universal law? Well, the problem here is that lying stops making sense. It becomes a contradiction on its own if you try to universalize it. If you try to say, everyone, for everyone in any case, it is okay to lie when it is convenient for you, then the concept of lying stops making sense, right? We would just assume that there would be no distinction between truth and lying, because we'd assume that everyone is lying to us when it benefits them, right? So there wouldn't be any reason to trust anyone, and no reason to believe that anyone is telling the truth in the first place, right? So by willing this rule, we undermine the conditions that allow us to do it, right? It makes us a hypocrite when we're not okay with other people lying to us whenever it's convenient, but we make an exception for ourselves that it's okay to lie to others, okay? I hope that makes sense. Again, it's difficult to articulate, I think, Kantian ethics well, and I'm just trying to hoping to do an okay job of it. All right. Okay, let's take a look at a different formulation of Kantian ethics. Kant calls this one the formulation of humanity. All right, and so here's how he'd put it: act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a mere means. Okay, what does he mean by this? Well, first let's understand what ends and means are. Okay, an end is the purpose to which you are doing something. Okay, say your end is passing this class. Okay, then that's the goal, right? A means to passing this class would be watching this video, right? It is a way that you can go about achieving that goal. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of humanity? Okay, so I think again I've tried to translate it into something a little bit more understandable here. It means that acting morally means respecting the idea that everyone is valuable because they are a person and not just for how they're useful to you, right? So this is important, right? The language here, mere means, is important. Okay, so say I go to a coffee shop and I'm ordering coffee from the barista. I am using them, right? I'm using them as a means to fulfill my ends of getting coffee and waking up for the day. Absolutely. But hopefully I'm not treating them as a mere means, right? Hopefully I am, not thinking of them just as a way to get my coffee, but also that there's a person there, that this is someone who's working a job, that they are, having to work in customer service, which is a chore by itself, right? I have to respect that humanity in them, right? So that means I shouldn't be rude to my barista, right? They are a person, and so by being rude or those people who go up in line and the barista will say, "Hey, welcome in. How are you doing today?" And they'll say, "Get me one black coffee," right? Well, that's treating them as a mere means because there's no engaging with their humanity on that level. Okay, so people are not just tools for your purposes. You have to treat them in all cases, right? Categorically, universally. As though, and they are, valuable because they are a person and for no other reason, right? Sure, they are useful to you. Say my fiance, for example, brings great happiness to me, and so she is a means of living a happy life, absolutely. But she's not a mere means, right? I understand that she is a person valuable in her own right, for her own goals. She has her own life that she's leading. And so despite what she can do to make my life happy, right, I need to respect that humanity in her, right? Hopefully that's coming across what Kant is meaning here by the formulation of humanity. Again, this is the same rule as what we saw in the formulation of universal law. These are both mere formulations, how we can communicate to others what it means to have a categorical imperative, right? This is you're supposed to be able to come to the same kinds of conclusions employing either one, right? And the reason why he's articulated it in so many different formulations is because this is a tough concept to get, right? As we'll kind of get to in the next lecture, the reason for being moral on Kant's framework is not, intuitive in the way that it is on other moral frameworks. But it is a remarkable moral system because not only does it tell you, what the right outcomes are in the world, it tells you what kind of person you should be and why you should be doing the right things, right? So that hopefully you're recognizing that this is a much deeper theory. It operates at a much deeper, much more personal level of morality than something like utilitarianism. Okay, and I think this video is getting long enough, and I'd love to talk more about it because again, there's some real strengths of this theory, and there are some weaknesses to it. But you have enough on your plate for the upcoming midterm exam, and again, this video is long enough. So we're going to continue with Kantian ethics next week, talking about its strengths, its weaknesses, and some other factors about it. Okay. Again, I'm hoping to just communicate this well enough. If you do have questions about it, by all means, please ask me. I want to make this clear because I think it's a really important theory to know, and it's difficult. And the reason why I'm teaching it is because we've now covered all of the three like big theories in ethics, right? That is virtue ethics, utilitarianism, and Kantian deontology, right? These are the three moral theories that you're going to be expected to know or expected to have been exposed to in any philosophy class, and it's good to know about them even if we don't fully understand them. Okay, I'll leave it off there, and I'll catch you in the next one.